Welcome, and thank you for joining us today. Across every civilization, in every era of human history, there have been stories of treasures that vanished without a trace. Not symbols or metaphors, but real objects, real wealth, and real secrets that once existed, and then simply disappeared. Gold meant for empires. Relics believed to hold sacred meaning. Fortunes lost to time, war, and silence. Tonight's story is about those mysteries. For more than 4 hours, this journey will take us across continents and centuries, into moments where history seems to pause, where records end, witnesses disappear, and unanswered questions remain. These are not legends created for entertainment. They are stories rooted in historical events, documented losses, and unresolved discoveries that continue to puzzle historians, archaeologists, and researchers today. Some of these treasures were lost in moments of chaos during invasions, revolutions, or sudden collapses of power. Others were hidden deliberately, meant to be protected, buried, or concealed for reasons that may never be fully known. In many cases, the people who knew the truth took it with them, leaving behind only fragments of information and generations of speculation. What makes these stories so compelling is not just the value of what was lost, but the silence that followed. Maps that lead nowhere. Clues that contradict each other. Locations searched countless times with nothing to show for it. And yet, the possibility remains that some of these treasures are still out there, untouched, waiting in darkness. This is not a story about fantasy. It is a slow, thoughtful exploration of history's most enduring mysteries, stories that remind us how much of the past is still hidden from view. So settle in, take a deep breath, and let the noise of the present fade away. Tonight, we step into the shadows of history, and begin a journey into the world of history's most mysterious lost treasures. This is not a story meant to be rushed. The journey you are about to experience unfolds over more than 4 hours, not because it needs to be long, but because history itself rarely offers simple answers. Each mystery we explore requires time, patience, and careful attention. These stories were not created in a single moment, and they cannot be understood in just a few minutes. A long format allows us to slow down. It gives space to trace the origins of each lost treasure, to understand the historical world in which it once existed, and to examine how it vanished. We move step by step, from ancient civilizations to more recent centuries, following trails that often grow colder rather than clearer. In doing so, the passage of time becomes part of the experience, mirroring the centuries that have passed since these treasures were last seen. Over the course of this extended journey, you will notice patterns begin to emerge. Power changes hands. Empires rise and fall. Wars, migrations, and political shifts leave chaos in their wake. And in the confusion of those moments, priceless objects disappear, sometimes stolen, sometimes hidden, sometimes simply lost. The length of this experience also invites reflection. Without interruptions or haste, listeners can sit with unanswered questions, consider multiple possibilities, and recognize how uncertainty is often the most honest conclusion history can offer. Not every mystery is solved. Not every search ends with discovery. Instead, this 4-hour journey offers something different: immersion. It allows us to step out of the present and into the quiet tension of the past, where every clue matters, and every absence tells a story of its own. This is not just a compilation of mysteries. It is an invitation to travel through time slowly, thoughtfully, and without expecting easy conclusions. Unlike many modern documentaries, this journey is told without written captions guiding the way. There is no scrolling text, no lines to read ahead, no shortcuts to the ending. Everything unfolds through voice alone, carefully paced, deliberately spoken, and meant to be experienced in real time. This approach changes how the story is received. Without captions, the listener is invited to slow down and engage more deeply with the narration itself. Every pause matters. Every shift in tone carries meaning. The absence of on-screen text removes distractions, allowing the imagination to take over, much like storytelling traditions that existed long before books, screens, or recordings. For most of history, knowledge was passed this way. Stories of lost cities, hidden riches, and vanished artifacts were carried by word of mouth, whispered across generations, altered slightly with each retelling. What survived was not always precise detail, but atmosphere, emotion, and mystery. In many ways, these lost treasures were never meant to be neatly summarized. They were meant to be remembered. Listening without captions also mirrors the uncertainty at the heart of these stories. Just as we cannot read exact instructions left behind by history, we cannot rely on written guidance here. We follow the voice forward, trusting it to lead us through fragments of evidence, incomplete records, and unanswered questions. This format encourages presence. It asks the audience not to skim, not to search for highlights, but to remain with the narrative as it unfolds minute by minute, story by story. The experience becomes less about information alone, and more about immersion. In a world that often demands speed and clarity, this choice feels intentional. It reminds us that some stories are not meant to be consumed quickly or efficiently. Some mysteries ask only that we listen and accept that not everything is meant to be fully revealed. Behind the decision to remove captions lies a quiet but important intention: protecting the work itself. In an age where content can be copied, reused, and redistributed within seconds, original storytelling has become increasingly fragile. Long-form historical narration requires research, structure, and careful writing, often built over months of reading, organizing sources, and shaping a coherent narrative. For creators who invest deeply in this process, the script is not just text. It is the foundation of the entire experience. By choosing not to provide captions, the creator places a barrier between the story and automated systems that extract and reproduce written material without context or credit. This choice does not come from secrecy, but from preservation and effort to ensure that the narrative remains intact, experienced as intended, and not fragmented into pieces scattered across the internet. This decision also highlights a growing tension between accessibility and originality. On one side is the desire to make content available in as many formats as possible. On the other is the reality that long-form storytelling is often vulnerable to misuse when stripped of its voice, pacing, and structure. The absence of captions reminds us that storytelling is more than words alone. Tone, rhythm, and silence all carry meaning. When text is removed from the screen, what remains is the human voice, and with it, a sense of authorship that is harder to replicate. In this way, the format becomes part of the message. It quietly asks the audience to respect the time, effort, and intention behind the story. To listen rather than extract. To experience rather than reproduce. And to understand that some narratives are meant to be encountered whole, not broken down into searchable fragments. As the journey continues, this respect for the story itself becomes a guiding principle, shaping how each mystery is presented and remembered. For the audience, this format creates a very different kind of experience. Without captions or visual guidance, the listener becomes more involved. There is no option to skim ahead, no highlighted text to jump between moments. Instead, the story unfolds at its own pace, asking for patience and attention. In return, it offers something increasingly rare: uninterrupted immersion. This listening-focused experience changes how time feels. As the hours pass, the modern sense of urgency begins to fade. The outside world grows quieter. The mind settles into a slower rhythm, one that matches the tone of historical reflection. This makes the journey especially suited for long listening sessions, late nights, quiet rooms, or moments when distraction feels overwhelming. The absence of captions also encourages imagination. Rather than reading words on a screen, listeners form their own mental images. Ancient cities take shape in the mind. Hidden chambers, forgotten roots, and sealed vaults feel more personal, more vivid. Each listener's version of the story becomes slightly different, shaped by memory, curiosity, and individual perspective. There is also a subtle sense of trust involved. The viewer agrees to follow the narrator without visual proof, without written confirmation, much like historians must rely on incomplete records and second-hand accounts. This mirrors the uncertainty surrounding lost treasures themselves. We listen, we consider, and we accept that some details remain unresolved. In this way, the experience becomes reflective rather than reactive. It is not designed for quick reactions or instant conclusions. Instead, it invites calm attention and quiet curiosity. The focus shifts away from outcomes and toward process, how mysteries form, how they persist, and how they continue to exist even without answers. By shaping the experience this way, the video becomes more than a collection of stories. It becomes a space one where history is not rushed, and where mystery is allowed to remain intact. The absence of a written transcript introduces an unexpected layer to the experience, limitation. Without searchable text, the story cannot be easily broken apart, quoted, or reduced to simple summaries. This makes analysis slower, more deliberate, and in many ways more human. Listeners must rely on memory, reflection, and repeated listening to fully grasp the details of each mystery. This mirrors the work of historians themselves. Much of historical research is built on fragments, incomplete documents, second-hand accounts, and gaps that cannot be filled with certainty. Scholars often revisit the same sources multiple times, each reading revealing something new. In the same way, this narrative rewards patience. Details resurface only when the listener returns, listens again, and reconsiders what they heard before. The lack of transcripts also discourages oversimplification. Without easy access to exact wording, the focus shifts from precise phrasing to broader understanding. What remains is not a list of facts, but a sense of atmosphere, cause, and consequence. The mysteries are understood as evolving stories rather than fixed conclusions. There is also a subtle protection of context. When text is extracted and shared independently, meaning is often lost. Statements can be separated from their surrounding explanations, leading to confusion or misinterpretation. By keeping the narrative intact through audio, the creator preserves continuity, ensuring that each idea is heard within the framework it belongs to. This approach asks something different from the audience. It asks for engagement rather than extraction, for listening rather than scanning, for thought rather than instant commentary. In return, it offers a deeper connection to the material, one that unfolds gradually, much like the historical mysteries themselves. In the end, analysis does not disappear. It simply changes form. It becomes internal, reflective, and personal, shaped by time, attention, and the quiet act of listening. Every creative decision carries consequences, and this one is no different. Removing captions inevitably affects accessibility. For some viewers, written text is not a convenience but a necessity. It helps overcome hearing limitations, language barriers, or difficult listening environments. Without it, the experience becomes more exclusive, accessible only to those who can fully rely on audio alone. This creates a quiet trade-off. On one hand, the absence of captions protects originality and preserves narrative integrity. On the other, it limits who can participate in the experience. This tension reflects a broader challenge in digital storytelling: how to balance protection, expression, and inclusion in an increasingly automated landscape. Silence, in this context, becomes meaningful. The lack of text highlights what is missing and invites reflection on how modern platforms shape the way stories are shared and consumed. It reminds us that technology offers powerful tools, but also forces difficult choices. Not every solution is perfect. Not every goal can be achieved at the same time. For some listeners, this limitation may create distance. They may rely more heavily on visual cues or written reinforcement to stay engaged. Without it, the story demands more concentration and effort. Yet for others, the same silence becomes an advantage, a space free from clutter, where voice and imagination take priority. This contrast reveals how varied audience needs truly are. No single format can serve everyone equally. Each choice emphasizes certain experiences while diminishing others. Acknowledging this does not weaken the narrative. It deepens it. It shows awareness of complexity, the same complexity found in history itself. In the end, accessibility is not ignored, but complicated. The absence of captions becomes part of the story's reality, a reminder that preservation, protection, and participation often exist in tension. And like the lost treasures themselves, something valuable is gained, while something else remains just out of reach. With no written words on the screen, sound becomes the sole guide through the story. Every detail, every location, every moment in time, every shift in historical context must be carried by the voice alone. This places unusual weight on narration. Pacing, tone, and clarity are no longer stylistic choices. They are essential tools that shape understanding. Listening becomes an active process. The audience is not simply receiving information, but participating in the construction of meaning. Each listener fills in visual gaps with imagination, drawing from personal experiences, memories, and knowledge of the past. Two people may hear the same story, yet picture entirely different worlds. This reliance on sound creates intimacy. A voice heard over several hours begins to feel familiar, almost companion-like. It echoes the way stories were once shared around fires, in quiet rooms, or during long journeys where listening was the primary way knowledge survived. In this setting, history feels less distant and more human. There is also vulnerability in this approach. Without visuals or text to reinforce meaning, misunderstanding is possible. A missed detail cannot be reread. A moment of distraction can cause a thread to slip away. Yet this fragility mirrors the nature of historical knowledge itself: incomplete, easily lost, and shaped by attention. The act of listening also encourages trust. The audience agrees to follow the narrator through uncertainty, accepting that not every detail will be immediately clear. This trust builds slowly, reinforced by consistency and care in storytelling. Over time, the listener learns how to listen, when to pause, when to reflect, when to simply let the story continue. In this way, sound becomes more than a medium. It becomes the path. Guided only by voice, the audience moves through centuries of unanswered questions, reminded that sometimes the most powerful journeys are those we take without written directions. Without captions or a written transcript, this story resists being broken into fragments. There are no lines to copy, no exact phrases to highlight, no moments that can be easily lifted and shared on their own. What remains instead is the experience as a whole, something that must be listened to in sequence, from beginning to end. This changes how the story lives beyond the video itself. In many ways, this protects meaning. When stories are reduced to short excerpts, they often lose their context. A single sentence, separated from its surrounding explanation, can feel misleading or incomplete. By keeping the narrative bound to sound, the creator ensures that ideas remain connected to the flow that gives them purpose. Sharing becomes interpretive, rather than literal. Viewers who discuss the content must rely on memory and understanding rather than direct quotation. They summarize in their own words, emphasize what stood out to them personally, and inevitably shape the story through their perspective. This mirrors how historical accounts spread long before written records were widely available, adapted slightly with each retelling. There is also a quiet resistance here. In a digital culture that favors speed, repetition, and replication, a story that cannot be easily extracted slows everything down. It asks listeners to engage more deeply before responding, to absorb before reacting. To understand before sharing. This does not eliminate discussion, it transforms it. Conversations become broader, more reflective, less focused on exact wording and more on meaning. Listeners talk about themes, emotions, and unanswered questions rather than specific lines. The mystery stays intact, unpinned by definitive statements. In this way, the story remains fluid. It exists not as text frozen on a page, but as an experience carried forward through listening and memory. And like the lost treasures it describes, its value lies not in what can be easily taken but in what must be carefully held. As this journey draws to a close, one thing becomes clear: these stories were never meant to end neatly. The absence of captions, transcripts, and clear conclusions reflects the very nature of lost treasures themselves. They exist at the edge of knowledge, somewhere between what is known and what has disappeared. History, in this sense, does not offer final answers. It offers traces. What remains after listening is not certainty, but awareness. Awareness of how easily objects, knowledge, and truth can slip out of reach. Awareness of how much of the past is shaped not by what survives, but by what is missing. Each treasure in this story leaves behind a silence, and it is within that silence that curiosity continues to live. This ending does not ask for resolution. It asks for reflection, for patience, for an understanding that some mysteries endure not because they have been overlooked, but because they resist closure. They invite ongoing thought rather than final judgment. In a world driven by speed and constant explanation, choosing to leave questions unanswered can feel unusual. Yet history reminds us that uncertainty is not a failure of knowledge, it is part of its structure. Many truths are incomplete, many stories unfinished. As you step away from this experience, the journey does not truly end. These stories continue in thought, in conversation, and in quiet moments when imagination returns to hidden places and forgotten paths. Somewhere, perhaps, these treasures still remain. Or perhaps they exist only as reminders of human ambition, loss, and the fragile nature of memory. And so, we leave the story where history often leaves us, not with answers, but with questions. And sometimes, that is exactly where the most meaningful journeys begin. Spending this time together listening, reflecting, and moving slowly through the quiet corners of history is what gives these stories their meaning. Lost treasures are not only about what vanished, but about what remains: curiosity, wonder, and the human need to remember. If this journey helped you relax, think, or simply escape the noise of the present for a while, then it has served its purpose. There is no rush to reach conclusions here. History moves at its own pace, and sometimes the greatest value lies in listening rather than searching for answers. If you choose to return to this story again, you may notice new details, new connections, or new questions forming in the silence. That is the nature of stories that are meant to be experienced slowly. Thank you for sharing this time and this quiet space. If you enjoy long-form historical journeys like this one, you are always welcome to stay connected. And if this is where your day or night begins to wind down, we hope the calm of these stories stays with you a little longer. Wherever you are, and whenever you are listening, we wish you a peaceful moment ahead. Good night, take care, and until next time.